Hey fellas, before I start the video, I just want to quickly state that this sort of touches on some controversial subject matter and it might be offensive to some viewers. Please be advised before you continue with this particular video because some of what we're going to be touching upon might be disturbing, maybe a little bit offensive for some of you all, but I just want to give you the quick heads up before we continue. If the subject matter we're going to be discussing today might disturb some of you all, you might want to consider watching some of my other lovely videos, but with that all sort of out of the way, let's go ahead and start the show. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Did you Panda back in action? Talk about something else today, but something else yet again. It's more furry drama. Except this is sort of a breaking news topic. I didn't find out about this until about a day ago, and I would appreciate if you could all take this a little bit more seriously than the typical programming that we have on this channel, because this is kind of serious, alright? This deals with domestic terrorism. And if you're not aware, basically, it was discovered that a furry had attempted to utilize IEDs, improvised explosive devices, in Asheville, North Carolina. He had an accomplice, one by the name of Andrew Duncan Small. However, we're not focusing on them right now. The individual that we're talking about here today is someone by the name of TechCoyote Fugate. Strain my brain now, like, to really pronounce that correctly, but they were known in the furry fandom as TechCoyote529, and by all accounts, just looking at his social media and his presence online, they didn't appear to be that prominent of an individual. Sure, they had a nice fursuit, sure that they liked to retweet a lot of things, and they had a little bit of presence on Twitter of all places, but at the same time, there was nothing really to distinguish him from anyone else, say you or I. Like, they just kind of existed, and I couldn't help but notice a few things about them, but as far as the details of the crime, this happened about July 4th, just a couple days ago. And this all took place at around like the Vance Memorial, or at least I should say the Vance Monument. And if you're not familiar, the Vance Monument sort of resembles the Washington Monument, big needle like pointing up to the sky. It was apparently memorializing somebody by the name of Zebulon Baird Vance. They're a former governor of North Carolina, and the only issue with that is the entire monument was removed like back in 2021. If you're wondering why, it's because Vance, he was kind of a racist asshole, He was, strong proponent of the Confederacy during the Civil War, being a bit of a proponent of slavery and racism, and that's basically the sticking point here, is that was the whole reason of its removal. Why do I mention that? It's because TechCoyote and his accomplice, Andrew Duncan Small, they basically went over there and they were trying to set off IEDs in and around the remains of the monument. For what reason or purpose, I have no idea, but the possession of the IEDs could have seriously injured or even killed some people, and it was considered enough of a concern that they were considered weapons of mass destruction. Surprised George W. Bush didn't get in on this, but yeah, it was kind of a shock because remember that whole polybun situation that I was mentioning out in Portland, that I was kind of expressing shock and awe and surprise that furries had opened fire. Well, a furry, granted somebody that was quite clearly on the alt-right, had opened fire at candlelight visual. I was kind of shocked, because generally speaking, and this is just in general, furries don't typically involve themselves in things like this. You don't really hear too many stories about furries going off the deep end and shooting up the place or anything like that, but the details are still coming out. There's not a whole lot to really substantiate the claims on Twitter that this was the act of an alt-right terrorist. Because TechCoyote, I looked into their background, they just seem to be kind of a lone wolf actor, And I'm not trying to defend fascism or racism or anything like that, but by all accounts, just looking at his social media, there wasn't anything overtly noticeable that was concerning. I will say that I noticed a few things about them. They appear to be a libertarian, and this is just appearances for appearance's sake, alright? They were retweeting a lot of messages that seemed to indicate they were more of a libertarian-leaning person, that they were more about less government, more power to the people sort of thing. What's interesting is at the time of their arrest, as in both TechCoyote and Andrew Duncan Small, they possessed body armor a flare gun, a Colt Navy revolver pistol, ammunition, and other paraphernalia, among which was a pamphlet basically titled Life Without Law, which is apparently an anarchist, pamphlet. Basically writings about, destruction of the government, I guess. I have no idea. But they were also carrying zip ties, Russian-era Cold War, gas mask, a GP5, I believe. Zip ties, which were basically hand restraints. It's all really weird, what were they out to do? Now, mind you, this was in a fairly crowded area where people were departing from watching the fireworks for 4th of July. That's the sticking concern here, is that if they decided to use their IEDs, they were being detonated at the remains of the memorial. And, the accomplice, Andrew Duncan Small, he was even overheard by bystanders, allegedly mentioning that he was going to blow up the remains of the monument. So I'm having a hard time getting a temperature reading on TechCoyote here because, again, they seem to be a little bit of an anarchist, libertarian-leaning person, appears to be a gun enthusiast because there's multiple videos of him shooting weapons on the range, one of which being a Sten gun from, World War II, Britain-era, weapon, but they appear to be a fan of animal art crimes, as in they had, a stop sign that had been, graffitied with animal art crimes, that fox that you see, displayed out in, urban areas. And they would routinely retweet sort of things like that, and they display that at conventions. I will say this, in my research of TechCoyote, they were an admitted, former member of the Furry Raiders. And if you don't know who the Furry Raiders are, they're basically a bunch of memesters and edgelords that like to cosplay as the furry equivalent of the Third Reich. I'm not fucking with you. They got armbands that basically emblazon, all red with a white spot with a paw print instead of a swastika. Very auspicious, very obvious to any onlooker, so they have earned the scorn of the furry fandom at large. But again, he left of his own free will and volition because he saw it as, a fairly shitty group, which, not too far from, an accurate statement, I would say. But other than that, he seemed to be a troubled individual. He would make an occasional, messages that denoted the idea that he wasn't doing all that well, but he was trying to be on the path of self-improvement. Trying. Granted, detonating IEDs in public areas and potentially causing, mass harm and panic to the, greater area of Asheville, probably not the best route to go. Just saying, probably not the path that you want to be stepping down on. Both individuals were arrested, and I believe TechCoyote, or Chioke, Odd, and Fugate, if you prefer, they're being held on bail, for about $15,000. I think Andrew Duncan Small is being held on bail for $16,000, and if you're wondering why an extra $1,000 was tacked on, he discharged a weapon in a densely populated area. TechCoyote admitted to wearing body armor during the commission of the crime, which, possession of body armor is not illegal on its own, but if you're, doing crimes while wearing body armor, then, whatever charges could potentially be pulled out of, the DA's ass. Yeah, they're just gonna tack on whatever they can, when you get arrested after, committing your crimes, but this is just a really weird case, and I might actually make a follow-up video if I find out more about this, because, a lot of furries reacted pretty viscerally when TechCoyote was revealed to be, a potential domestic terrorist. And I say that because somebody even went out of the way to be like, holy shit, I had sex with this guy! Not something I'd publicly admit, personally, but ooh boy, it got spicy, and, people were complaining about TechCoyote just being, basically a thorn in the side of all North Carolina furries. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see where this all goes, but I would just like to tell you all that It did not escape my notice. You know, I was still recovering from my trip to Anthrocon, so it was during the work on my return from Anthrocon video that I couldn't help but notice this happen. Thankfully, no one got injured and no one died, so that's a plus, right? But it's kind of dispelling that notion of mine that furries don't typically get involved with this sort of thing, you know? Granted, it's fairly uncommon. Like, in the history of the furry fandom, you don't see too many murders occur, like, where the furry was the, like, you know, the suspect. You don't see too many stories like this. It's not something that's common, although more incidents like this is probably going to be like putting egg on my face, so let's hope not, because we don't really need more incidents like this, right? But yeah, certainly an interesting case, because, you know, talk about your usual suspects. There was nothing to indicate that TechCoyote was going to pull this off, although they did reach out to somebody, like, you know, a prominent member of the furry fandom. And the prominent member of the furry fandom, I forget what name they had off the top of their head, but you know, TechCoyote had actually reached out to them and was like, hey, like, you're pretty cool. I really like you. And I was hoping that we could get a chance to talk, blah, 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 blah. And after this had happened, this potential act of terrorism and everything like that, the prominent furry just, like, was saying, I will never leave anybody unread, like, ever again. Because they probably read the message, glazed over it, and was like, yeah, they weren't going to respond to it. Not immediately, anyway. But then this happens, and, you know, they actually felt guilty that they might have contributed to, like, you know, TechCoyote pulling this off. Now, what's crazy is that TechCoyote had been to protests like this up to this point, and they were actually known to the city officials. As in, the officials basically had wanted this guy for questioning. They were a person of interest, you know? Like, whenever police say that this is a person of interest, it's either because they're a witness to something or they're a suspect to something. And TechCoyote, like, they're shown in, like, a picture wearing a beret. My question is, why the fuck did they decide to bring, like, a flare gun and a Colt Navy revolver? The Colt Navy revolver kind of raised my eyebrows, because it's just like, was TechCoyote playing a little bit too much Red Dead Redemption, like, too? Was Andrew Duncan Small the Dutch, like, Vanderbilt in, like, this situation? Come on, Arthur, just one more score! Just one more little protest and it'll all be over! I don't know. It was goofy as hell. Like, this whole thing is just goofy as hell. That's the best way I could describe it. I'm only, like, taking the piss right now because nothing, like, a lot of shitty things could have happened. When I say shitty things, I mean, like, people losing their lives and shit like that, or being, like, mortally wounded. But thankfully, none of that happened. But if the monument was already removed and, like, shipped out, then why? Like, why try to blow up the remains of the monument? Like, was this bragging rights? Was this really going to prove anything? Was this going to substantiate anything? And, you know, typically people on the alt-right, or, like, you know, anybody on the right in general, would have the connotations of being racist themselves, and the Vance Monument would definitely be something that they would want to keep there, like, with the justification that it's a site of historical significance and therefore needs to remain right where it is. If they're trying to blow up the remains of it, wouldn't that show that they had extreme prejudice against it? You know, because, like I mentioned before, Zebulon Baird Vance, the former governor of North Carolina that the monument was dedicated to, yeah, they were Confederate, and they were also a strong proponent of slavery, and, you know, they had very racist views. That's the whole reason it got removed in the first place. So, if you're going to be shitting on the former site of a monument dedicated to that guy, what does that substantiate? It would mean that, like, you know, TechCoyote would have to be anti, like, slavery, anti-Confederacy, and anti-racism. Like I said before, this is a weird case. It's like, what was trying to be accomplished here? I'm not seeing a whole lot of evidence that they specifically tried to target individuals, like protesters and things like that, but, you know, if you're armed and you're wearing body armor, that tells me that you're prepared for a gunfight, and the only other people that are around would be people that went to go see, the 4th of July celebration, or potentially protesters. So the argument can be made both ways, because there's not a lot of strong evidence to support, like, the theory that TechCoyote is an alt-right Nazi. What I will say is, I think they were an anarchist, and they appear to be a libertarian-leaning person. Not trying to, like, defend their activities or anything like that, but I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this mystery. Like, what's actually accurate, what's just hyperbole, and what's exaggeration. Because, a lot of furries immediately jumped on the bandwagon of, oh my god, an alt-right terrorist. And, he fits the bill of the perception of what most furries would think an alt-right terrorist would look like. Young, white, male, a lone wolf actor. I'm actually very curious to hear some commentary from, the North Carolina furs. What was he like at fur meets? What was he like at conventions? Did he say anything truly spicy or abhorrent? Or, was he really just a troubled young man that got wrapped up in something that was a little bit bigger than his britches? So, yeah, all that to be stated, this is probably going to go to trial, as you would imagine, unless, TechCoyote's parents is willing to dole out $15,000 for his release, in which case, even then, there's, stipulations with that, so, good luck. But yeah, not too much more to say about this. I'm definitely going to keep an eye on this, and if I find out anything else, I'll certainly, add an addendum, a follow-up to this video, because it's certainly an interesting case. It's always unfortunate to see a furry, turn to the dark side, and, whatever emptiness that they're feeling on the inside, they feel this need to find meaning in life. And I guess, in his case, he had adopted the mantra of being anti-government, and, I'm curious if he actually is a racist, or if he's, this, that, or the other, as, other furries try to say. But anyway, not too much more to say about this. It's going to be interesting to see, how this proceeds in court. So let's hope that justice is served and he gets more than just a stern talking to. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all I gotta say about that. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Till next time, guys, take care and peace. I hope you'll have a better one. Hey fellas, thanks for watching the video today. I really hope you all enjoyed it. Would you care to hit that like button and subscribe for more? I really appreciate that, right? And hey, if you're in the mood for gaming, why don't you check me out on Twitch sometime, link in the description below. Anyway, till next time guys, take care and peace. I hope you all have a better one.